I think the royal family is on the edge of collapse. Now, I know this sounds apocalyptic and almost journalistic, but I blame Charles as much as Andrew. Andrew's lucky; no one's going to chop his head off. At least no white Caucasian is going to chop his head off. Our experience is that other people do chop heads off.
The monarchy represents the old white Christian civilization, and the fact that these groups exist where they want to entirely remove the monarchy is a bit concerning for me.
So one of the things that's coming out is that the royal family have known about Andrew and his life for a long time. Charles also thought the royal family could get away with having a black sheep who misused his platform.
Well, I thought Fawlty Towers was the best thing ever out of UK, but this is pressing it. Maybe the king knew about this. He should abdicate and put Prince William in charge next.
William is married to a really excellent woman, a high-class, clever, kind, and good woman. She's pretty, and she appears to have really, well, just a nice human being.
Don't you have her poster up in your room? You told me.
No, we don't.
Oh, I thought you said that earlier off camera. Okay.
She's a little bit too much like my stepmother. I think. How could he manage a coronation as he stood up and said, "I will now be the supreme governor of the church and the defender of faith that I've told you all I don't believe in. I have no idea." How does that work exactly? The civil service in England is the center of the gravity of the black hole of wokery.
Well, what I hear about Nigel is that he does have the cunning. Obviously, he has the cunning. Nobody's ever going to question that about Nigel.
Yes.
I mean, he's hanging out in Florida at Mar-a-Lago half the time. So this guy knows what he's doing.
I was invited to the House of Lords a few days ago to give a speech to Cambridge Conservative politicians. And I said, guys, you're toast. There's nothing to conserve anymore. So we didn't have any fighter pilots because DEI said they've got to be brown women, ideally gay. And they couldn't find enough to pass the tests to do it. You're facing two absolutist enemies, and they are Islamic theocracy and Marxist utopianism. What are you going to do?
Hi, this is Justin, your host here at Reclaiming Christendom. I'm honored to be with my esteemed colleague, Dr. Gavin Ashenden. Gavin, how are you today? Where are you these days? I haven't seen you around lately.
Oh, well, I'm very well. I've been really quite busy speaking and writing. In fact, I'm at full stretch, but I think I like it, so it's quite okay. The good news is that people are responding very, very positively, and so one feels one's life is worthwhile in terms of the metrics that are offered us.
That's always a good feeling, and I have to tell you, we all over the United States have been seeing this particular photo from a police car, from I believe it's the back of the police car, all over the United States, of the artist formerly known as Prince Andrew.
Andrew, yes.
Seems to be in the back of a police car, and even here in the States, this is making very, very big news. So I can imagine in the UK what's going on right now.
It's the first time since we committed regicide that we've arrested a member of the royal family. So Andrew's lucky; no one's going to chop his head off. At least no white Caucasian is going to chop his head off. Our experience is that other people do chop heads off. In fact, only 40 miles away from where I am sitting here in Normandy, a wonderful elderly priest had his head chopped off by some non-indigenous people who lived in Rouen. So Andrew shouldn't. But on the other hand, I've heard people say that they think he's a flight risk and he's likely to flee somewhere where there isn't an extradition treaty, rather than face the possibility of doing time for misbehavior in public office.
Well, yeah, I think the misconception, especially over here, is this has something to do with the sexual scandals, which had happened obviously earlier, and which I know he had settled in a civil suit, paid an undisclosed amount. But apparently he was acting as the UK trade envoy, I understand, from 2001 to 2011. And this is misconduct in public office. And so this sounds pretty serious from what I'm hearing.
Well, it certainly is serious. The maximum sentence for this is life imprisonment. So our legal system takes it very seriously. I'd like to not exactly correct you, but to fill in the gaps between your dots. The reason why they're doing this and they're not pursuing his, what should we call it? The charges, the alleged charges of abusing women, is that there is evidence for this from the Epstein Files, and the evidence for sexual abuse has yet to emerge in a way that the courts can test. You say he settled things with Virginia Giuffre. Well, he basically paid her some money, but I mean, she was one person. The accusation has never been that he confined his attention to her. There are two aspects to Epstein's life. One is the sexual stuff, which everyone's very energized by, but the other is a web of influence and control amongst the elite, many of whom no doubt he blackmailed, where people did a lot of insider trading, allegedly. So the fact is that we know what he's done in terms of insider trading, because the emails have emerged where, when there was a deal, within, I think, 5 minutes, he had sent an email of the confidential details of that deal to Epstein. And we have another politician who was a friend of Epstein's who's done exactly the same thing, a man called Mandelson, who was Tony Blair's éminence grise.
Peter Mandelson?
Oh, sorry, Peter Mandelson, so sorry. So thank you very much. Saving people writing in saying, oh, Gavin, have you gone senile? And the answer is the early signs of dementia, certainly here, but they're only the early signs, middle and late.
Early, yeah. We don't want to get to the later ones. Well, we might get higher ratings when we get to that. That'll be interesting. But go
Absolutely. Ahead. But this is much more significant than even the things we've been talking about, because I've written recently about the way in which I think the royal family is on the edge of collapse. Now, I know this sounds apocalyptic and almost journalistic, but I blame Charles as much as Andrew for different reasons. But blame is not the wrong word. Attribute responsibility is what I'm talking about. So the monarchy is a Catholic concept, and it's a concept that Catholics have worked out in great detail over the years, ever since Constantine as a Christian offered to Christianize society. And I don't want to patronize our listeners, many of whom will be more historically informed than I am, but from Constantine onwards, there have been dynamic relations between the Pope and the Emperor in terms of how they interacted together. And essentially, the popes said to the emperors from the 4th and 5th century right up to Charlemagne and beyond, you have a responsibility to us. We will hold your consciences, and you will inject Christianity into the body politic. But you are answerable to us for the life of the Spirit. The intention is that you should so govern that people can be saved. This isn't about good governance for its own sake. It's about governance for salvation. The understanding that what the kingdom of heaven meant when we pray, thy kingdom come, was never a variation on the kind of left's utopian idea of a civil society. It was in order that people, as St. Paul suggests, have access to salvation. Needless to say, emperors didn't much like being subject to popes, and there were times when popes behaved very badly indeed. One of the reasons the Reformation took place was because Henry didn't feel he was getting an ear from the uncle of the woman he was trying to get an annulment from. And one of the reasons he didn't was because Charles V, as emperor, was besieging Rome at the same time. So I'm not pretending that the situation has always been clear and taking a purist view. I'm simply saying that the theory of monarchy is a Catholic one, and the roles of emperor and pope in their best performance model has been well understood. Needless to say, best performance has not often been produced. However, what England did was to say, well, Henry said, I'm not willing to allow the emperor, the pope, to have my conscience. I'm going to become pope. And so in Henry VIII, all of a sudden, the Pope and the Emperor become one person. Shame the man's a psychopath and out to lunch. Not a good model to try and practice this new fusion in. But then there's a very interesting 100 years in English history when the English trying to work out what the implications of having dethroned the Pope are in terms of the king's accountability to God and accountability to the church. If the king is now head of the church, in what way can the church hold him accountable? Well, the Stuarts came up with a variation on this, Charles I in particular, and the whole idea of the divine right of kings is an attempt to work out this implication that the anointed king has a right before God to not be accountable to the Pope or the state. The state took a dim view of this and they chopped his head off. And then they appointed another monarchy, and they made it very clear that whatever the relationship between the king and the state was, the state now held the king's conscience. And so we've been in that period for some time. It's a Protestant schismatic variation, and it's not worked terribly well in the sense that the king has not ever since what we call the Glorious Revolution here, he's never really contributed much to the Christianization of the state. He's done some choreography. He's emblematically represented God, but there's been no great interference on behalf of the kingdom, until finally what Charles has done is to break the relationship between the monarchy and the Christian faith completely. What he's done is to say, I'm going to exercise my role as defender of the faith, but it's not going to be the Christian faith anymore. It's going to be faiths. Well, when you do that, you essentially repudiate Christianity. Some people see this as a very generous, humanistic expansion of the hospitality of all religion and spirituality. But effectively, it's a repudiation of Jesus saying, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And really, theologically, no other religion offers to bring people reconciled to the mind behind the universe as Father. It's a completely, I can say completely unique, that's tautological. It is the unique gift of Jesus and Christianity. And to dignify other faiths with a specific role in this, that's not to say the Holy Spirit doesn't work wherever he finds human beings made in the likeness and image of God, but to dignify other religions as if they were doing that, or if they're engaged even in the same process, which they're not, is a very serious category of. Effectively, what Charles did was to break forever, at least in terms of the line of the monarchy, the accountability of the monarchy to Christianity, let alone the church. So you have Charles, if you like, cutting the monarchy off at the roots. Then if there is a role that the monarchy plays, it is to reflect back to us some of the most beautiful parts of redeemed humanity, honor, dignity, truth, continence, beauty. And the idea of the royal family is that they must behave in such a way as to be emblematic of all that's best in Christianity. If you have someone like Andrew behaving in a way that's really an exemplary of all that's worst in humanity, then you've undercut the authenticity, the legitimacy of the monarchy in two absolutely essential ways at the same time. My position has been the monarchy can't possibly survive this. So in the way in which it's received by the people, the scandalous behavior of Andrew will bring opprobrium on the monarchy. And what we're about to discover is that the king defended him in this. The whole of the establishment has been almost certainly, allegedly, involved in the cover-up in terms of what Andrew's done.
Yes, but I guess what raised an eyebrow for me in this whole scandal was I noticed that the crime report that was sent to the Thames Valley Police was sent that which got Andrew arrested, was sent by an organization called Republic. And this is an anti-monarchy organization. And the fact that they're out there, this is a fairly large organization, and their entire reason to live is to remove the monarchy. Although I agree with what you say, and I don't think anyone in their right mind will defend Andrew from any side of the aisle in this case. I do find it a bit perturbing that there's these large organizations that are sending police reports, files to the police to remove the monarchy. And part of me wonders and has the feeling here watching from the other side of the pond, whether the far left and the liberals and the communists have a great interest in removing the monarchy because, in some extent, the monarchy represents the white Christian. Now, that's debatable whether they're Christian, which you've made rather clear, but the monarchy represents the old white Christian civilization. And the fact that these groups exist where they want to entirely remove the monarchy is a bit concerning for me. What is your take on that?
You're quite right. And given that there are some very hostile forces out there, you would think that the monarchy would make it their business not to give them any leverage or influence by, if you like, representing the best of the monarchy. So in Charles's case, appealing to Islam, rather like just the left-wing Labour government has done, in order to enlarge the basis of his support, is a very serious error. There is nothing in Islam or the Islamic community that is going to favour the head of the Protestant Church. They may be pleased that he's bestowing civic legitimacy on them by opening mosques and libraries and cultural centres, but if he expects this will create some kind of reciprocal obligation, that would be very ignorant. So you're right. If Andrew knew that there are people willing to bring the monarchy down should he misbehave and be caught, you'd think that perhaps for the sake of his family or for the sake of the monarchy or the sake of the country, he might not misbehave, but he has. So both Charles and Andrew have behaved in a way that gives a weapon to these people. And they never needed a weapon. They were always ready to do this. And so, of course, they're taking the evidence of, I would say, the misdemeanors of both men. Charles is the misdemeanors of faith, and Andrew the misdemeanor of morals. And they're using it to destroy the monastery.
I know Charles, in the last few months, stripped Andrew of his titles, kicked him out of the royal palace. I think he had a big quote, let the law take its course. Do you think Charles, so obviously he knew what was coming, and he's done fairly large things to distance himself from it, but do you think it's enough for Charles, or do you think Charles' head will be chopped as well, so to speak?
I think I can say I know it's not enough. But even to ask the question is to mistake, with respect, the scope of the problem. So one of the things that's coming out is that the royal family have known about Andrew and his life for a long time. And what they've done is they've actually sought to cover it up. So there's a royal biographer whose name escapes me, which is a shame. He's a clever and clearly a man of considerable integrity who's touring the studios at the moment. And he's been asking questions about the behavior of Andrew and the royal family for over 10 years. And the civil service and the royal establishment and the people close to the royal family have all been told to block him. But what he's trying to do is not bring the royal family down. He was trying to hold Andrew accountable for the misuse of his position. And the fact is that Charles is party to that. The real danger to Charles in terms of Andrew is that Charles also thought the royal family could get away with having a black sheep who misused his platform for both allegedly immoral sexual and immoral fiscal activities. And I mean, what should Charles have done the moment he discovered that Andrew was behaving like that? That would have been the moment to say the law must take its course. Not 10 years later, after a failed campaign of trying to hide him from the public. So there's something, I'm sorry to say, if the evidence that we're getting through is true, then there's something really selfishly disingenuous about Charles's behavior. If what he's doing now is supposed to represent his ethics, why didn't he do it 10 years ago when he knew quite as much as he knows now, if the sources are to be believed?
Well, so the other thing we're hearing over here is, okay, maybe the king knew about this. He should abdicate and put Prince William in charge next. Prince William over here, the United States, people have generally, from my feeling, and his wife, a good opinion of him, as opposed to some of the other ones. So what is the take over there in the UK in terms of Prince William's reputation, and how do you feel about that? The idea of abdication, he can use health as an excuse. I know King Charles has cancer. In a few months, he could say, listen, the stress, for health reasons, I need to step down. I need to abdicate. And Prince William is taking over, which seems to have, at least over here, a fairly decent reputation.
I think, with respect, you're confusing presidency and monarchy. There's no doubt at all that Prince William is a very nice man, and he's married to an even nicer woman. The woman he's married to appears to be a really high caliber lady. She's a middle class bourgeois English woman who's married in the royal family. She's pretty, and she appears to have really, well, just a nice human being.
Don't you have her poster up in your room? You told me.
No, I don't.
Oh, I thought you said that earlier off camera. Okay.
She's a little bit too much like my stepmother. I think probably not. We could do without. There are some associations you can take too far. I think the problem is that you're not a king because you're popular, but you can become not a king through unpopularity. In other words, it's not exactly symmetrical. So if William was king, it would be because he was king. I mean, you have a king, you put up with them, they are who they are. The difficulty is that Charles has already removed Charles has removed the Christian element of kingship from the House of Windsor to the concept. We know that William has no faith. He said he's no idea. He doesn't. He's a nice agnostic boy, highly secularized, propagandized by the secular modernist experiment. Kate, I suspect, may have developed something else in the light of the horrible experience of her cancer. But William, well, he's just a nice young man. Could he? But having said what he said about faith, how could he manage a coronation as he stood up and said, "I will now be the supreme governor of the church and the defender of faith that I've told you all I don't believe in. I have no idea." How does that work exactly? So maybe William shouldn't be king because he doesn't have any faith. Do we not need a governor of the church, a defender of the faith who has faith? I think we do. There's a level of kind of there's a minimum level of congruity out there. So what does William do? Does he not take the throne until we get to a member of the royal family who actually has faith? Well, the only person who qualifies, I think, was a Roman Catholic, a distant aunt of the royal family who died about 3 months ago, but she's a Catholic, so she can't either. I don't know who would qualify now to do this. So will the country live without a Christian monarch? Probably. The difficulty is that Andrew has brought such moral opprobrium upon the family. Charles and William bring a kind of religious vacancy to the family. What's it for? I mean, it's got to be more than just a kind of Disneyland concentrated in one family. That's not how monarchy works. So maybe we have a new definition of monarchy that's fit for postmodernity. Maybe that will work. I've no idea. All I know is it's not monarchy as I understand it, or as England has ever understood it. So I can't tell what's going to happen, but I don't think it looks very good.
Well, you know what's interesting is there's a lot going on in the UK recently, and part of me wonders, you never know with the media if they're working on distractions. But for example, I know there was this, which looks like a wonderful party, this Restore Britain, was just launched by Rupert Lowe. And it was everywhere in the headlines. I was finding it all over X. I know immediately they had 80,000 members. And now I hear nothing. I hear nothing about that anymore. So I just wonder a little bit, what your take on all of this is. Do you feel, to an extent, because this is going to dominate, it's dominating the headlines over here. Do you feel that some of this is strategic in that it can quell anything else that was going on that might be happening, for example, with Restore Britain and Rupert Lowe's effort there?
No, I don't think so. Well, you're asking two questions. One, you're asking about the potential success of Rupert Lowe's party, Restore Britain. And the other is you're asking wider political question about the wider dynamics of not conspiracy theory, but I mean, how are the parties struggling? They're not struggling very much because the election's 4 years away, so there isn't an issue. Starmer is never going to resign on a matter of principle. He might be on the end of a coup from his colleagues in the Labour Party, but he's not going to stand aside willingly. There is nothing to
Mendelsohn, though, right? Starmer appointed Peter Mendelsohn.
Yes, but it's not that. But that shows the most extraordinary error of judgment. But prime ministers don't resign because they've made errors of judgment. There's nothing. There's nothing to make him resign. I mean, his reputation, sure, but then he has the worst reputation of any prime minister we've ever had, I think. So he's surviving that so far. So what I'm saying is that the reality at the moment is that the very hard left Labour Party we have governing Britain has got 4 more years to really twist the tourniquet and starve us of political freedom and freedom of speech. It's a very worrying position. My position has always been that was going to happen, and when they finished, that's when the ambitions for Islamic political intervention in our country's affairs begin to express themselves. By that time, the rest of us have been seriously disempowered by what is increasingly a totalitarian state. So that's what I think is going to happen. What difference does Rupert Lowe make and restore Britain? Well, I was quite optimistic until I saw David Starkey, who's a very sharp, waspish, as it happens, gay, but that's got nothing to do with his intellect, historian, talking to Rupert Lowe, whom he knows and likes. And you suddenly realized the gap in their intellectual competence. And Rupert Lowe, who I think is the most marvelous man, I really, really like him. The moment I heard that advert, I sent some money to restore Britain. Have some money. You have hit the nail on the head. What you intend to do, particularly with re-migration, is the only thing that will work if you can get away with it. But one has to ask, if Rupert Lowe came to power and if the English state decided it was going to re-migrate Muslims from this country, I wonder what we think the response of the Muslims was going to be. I don't think they'd accept it. So then what would happen? That would be interesting. But politically speaking, there is no alternative. That would be the only way to literally restore Britain. One of the things that David Starkey was saying to Rupert, so Rupert was saying, as a very good bourgeois farmer, a man full of integrity, but I mean, Jesus lamented his followers were not as wise as serpents. He commended the gentleness as doves, but he kept on saying, use your brains, people. And so Starkey said to Rupert Lowe, use your brains, Rupert. Rupert was saying, well, we're going to bring an army of MPs who are very good as teachers, administrators, doctors, lawyers, farmers, good people to government. And then Starkey said, no politicians. No, very, very few professional politicians, said Rupert Lowe. And so Starkey said, how the hell are you going to survive the traps that the civil service lay for you? Because they are the most sophisticated of political creatures in the system, and they're all totally and completely antithetic to what you stand for. I mean, the civil service in England is the center of the gravity of the black hole of wokery. And so already today, you must, I'm sure politicians constantly say, well, we promised to do this in our manifesto. We came into office saying we would do this. We set about doing this, and the civil service just ate us alive. They just stopped us. I mean, we even have a television show called Yes Minister explaining how they do it. And it's very, very funny. And it's very, very descriptive. So Starkey said to Rupert Lowe, how are you going to govern in the face of a civil service that is determined you should not govern? On that point, Rupert Lowe didn't have anything to answer. And I put my head in my hand and thought, I was seduced by what I wanted to be instead of what can be. Politics is the art of the possible. And I'd forgotten that for a moment as I was just delighted by Rupert Lowe. And I realized maybe Farage has the cunning. I mean, I'm not sure that he has the personality. He may not have the principles. He may not have the capacity to work with other people. But I think he's probably the only person on the right who has the political cunning to deal with reality as it is. And if you don't have that, it doesn't matter what you do. So there's a very interesting, there's a good guy called Tim Stanley. I like him very much. He's a correspondent for the Daily Telegraph. He writes increasingly good political sense. He's actually behaving like a middle-aged statesman. And the other day he said, Rupert Lowe is every kind of Englishman's fantasy Churchill, but there is no possibility whatsoever that he could succeed in what he was doing. People, please remember, politics is the art of the possible, not the fanciful. And whatever happens, don't split the vote on the right. If you split the vote on the right, because one of the things that's going to happen, obviously, is that the left are going to coalesce together in order to stop the right. This is what's happened in France. So in France, we have Marine Le Pen, and the French left are really quite vigorous. The French left are willing to vote with absolutely anybody, including Islamists. And that was the whole point of Michel Houellebecq's excellent book, Submission, in which he saw the French left giving the whole of the responsibility for education in France over to the Islamist party, making all education Islamist in order only to keep Marine Le Pen out of power. He was absolutely right. The left will work extremely hard to vote in any form of coalition against Farage. If we split the right-wing vote, there isn't a hope of hell in carrying the election. So, like it or not, I understand why Rupert Lowe did what he did. The Farage people turned on him in a way that I won't repeat because it was just awful, and how does it help us to repeat it? Lowe had every reason to do what he did. Is it going to work? I don't see how it could work. Do I like it? Yes. Would I support him? Yes. Would I vote for him? Yes. Will it displace the left? No. Will they ever be in a position to exercise a policy of remigration? Can't ever see it being politically possible. And then when they get there, what happens then is we have civil war, of course. Well, we'll have to have a civil war. But this route isn't feasible. I don't think. I can't tell you how pleased I'd be to be wrong. If somebody came up and said, Gavin, you've really misunderstood that Rupert Lowe there is enough of central England, enough of Christian England, enough of sensible, intelligent England, enough of English England to make this possible, well, I would just go and dance non-stop until it happened. But I don't think it's the case.
Well, what I hear about Nigel is that he does have the cunning. Obviously, he has the cunning. Nobody's ever going to question that about Nigel.
Yes.
I mean, he's hanging out in Florida at Mar-a-Lago half the time. So this guy knows what he's doing. The question I hear over there is whether he really is a conservative, or is he more practical and he's aligning himself too far with Islam and too far with the left. So the question is, yes, maybe he can get into office, but if he does, is it just more of the same once again?
Oh, no. Well, I don't think it is that. Nigel Farage is the most courageous, extraordinary political operator. I mean, ever from the moment when he crashed his little biplane, where he was flying a little advertisement behind the aeroplane for UKIP at the time, and walked away with courageous broken bones. No, let no one doubt his courage or his determination. Can he work with people? Apparently not. Does he have a big ego? Yeah, well, you'd need to do what he did. Is he a conservative? Well, I have no idea. But in a sense, we almost don't need a conservative. This is the Nick Fuentes argument. I don't mean to support Nick Fuentes, but it was listening to Nick Fuentes that sent me back to the drawing board to do some more thinking. Fuentes is influenced by a school of political philosophy in the 1980s and 90s that said, if the long march through the institutions has succeeded and all the institutions that conservatives want to conserve are taken over by the left, then all you do as a conservative is you look after the institutions within which the left are wreaking their havoc. In other words, if I may say so, I was invited to the House of Lords a few days ago to give a speech to Cambridge Conservative politicians. And I said, guys, you're toast. There's nothing to conserve anymore. I mean, or literally, the civil service, the Church of England, education, health. The army. There were 2 years when we didn't pick any fighter pilots because they couldn't find any non-white men good enough. So we didn't have any fighter pilots because DEI said they've got to be brown women, ideally gay, and they couldn't find enough to pass the tests to do it. So there weren't any. That's how much the institutions you might want to conserve have fallen to the left. So there's no point in being a conservative. There's nothing to conserve. Nick Fuente's point is, okay, well then we'll mimic Antifa, we'll burn the place down in the name of dispossessed white men and start again. Well, you can see why they'd be angry and want to do that. Is that the only solution the right have? Well, that's a very good question, and that's the solution I took to the House of Lords. And one of the things I said to them was, you're faced by this is not a national thing, this is a global thing. We're in a completely new historical position. You're facing two absolutist enemies, and they are Islamic theocracy and Marxist utopianism. What are you going to do? Do you think that English Conservative Party has the answer ideologically or in any other way to these two enormous, ambitious, absolutist ideologies? It doesn't. If you ask me what point of view, what perspective, what philosophy, what way of life has the response to it, I'll tell you. You haven't asked me. Let me tell you anyway. It's the Catholic Church. Effectively, what I tried to do politely as I could was to say, if you guys don't become Catholics, you're the toast you've already become. And this is no longer a tribal thing. This is no longer, please join my team, I like my team more than yours. It really isn't that. It might have been that 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years ago. It really isn't. We live in a moment of civilizational potential disaster. And the two other forces we face are both absolutist and totalitarian. And so what would you call our position? Perhaps Christian personalist. But the only Christians who have a theology of personhood, which protects people from abortion or euthanasia, it's the Catholic Church. So I don't know what else you would call the position that I'm recommending that you would take in order to preserve the dignity and the freedoms of humanity. But the shorthand is be a Catholic, or else you'll never stop being toast.
Okay, well, I think that's something we can both agree on. I mean, the picture you paint over there is certainly a dire one. But as you said, it's not a national thing. It's a global thing.
Absolutely.
And that's why, obviously, we have Reclaiming Christendom, because we understand that Christianity in the Catholic Church is the only solution to all of this. You can talk endlessly about these subjects, but as long as those philosophies or religions or whatever you want to call them are dominating like a dark cloud throughout the world, which currently they are, there's nobody safe from them, and there's nothing you can really do. You can put up temporary structures to fight them, but when they've penetrated every university, every institution, the water, you're putting sandbags against the rising water, and there's nothing you can do. So let's explore that further on next episode. And I'm sure by the time we meet next week, there's going to be a lot more gossip coming out of your country. You're providing excellent gossip for us here in New York, so we thank you for that.
Well, I'm so glad we're contributing to the American entertainment industry, and I hope it's both economically helpful and ideologically restitutive.
Well, I thought Faulty Towers was the best thing ever out of UK, but this is pressing it. But either way, we thank you for that, and I will see you soon.
Thanks, Justin.
Take care.